Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, man. So we do have the round 6 from the FIDE Grand Prix going on, and I do have Wesley Soul versus Alexandr Predke. And for those of you that might be wondering, Russian players are not allowed to represent the Russian flag right now. So that is why you see, well, I mean, I put the Russian flag because I can do whatever I want. But like I said, Russian players, they have to play. There's like some special like symbol that they're playing under now, or they just have to play under international and stuff like that. But anyways, for all of my people that are coming from the Philippines, I will say Maligayang Pagdating sa mga chess, ladies and gentlemen. Let me see. Magandang umaga, magandang hapon, magandang araw, magandang gabi, whatever time it is when you watch this video. However many of you that are going to watch it, I appreciate you guys very much. Maraming salamat, aking makaibigan. Kamusta na? You know, hopefully everybody is doing well where they're at. For anybody who is coming from Russia, I will say privyet to you, and I will say dobre otra if it is morning for you. I don't know, good afternoon. I will say spasibo. Appreciate you guys very much for watching my stuff. Kakadela to you. How you guys doing? Thank you very much for stopping by. But yes, if you guys are ready to go, let's go ahead and smash on this game and see what we got. So we got e4, e5, knight comes to f3. We see knight to c6, bishop to b5, and we have a6. And this is known as the Roy Lopez or the Spanish game, and it is the Morphy defense. I'm not sure. I don't think he was the first person to play it, but you know, a lot of the times, you know, they attribute a name to an opening that's played like the most by a person. You know, or maybe who is the most famous person to have played it. So A6 is attributed to him. And basically 90% of the time, you're going to see bishop coming back to A4. You do sometimes have bishop taking C6, and then bishop pawn taking C6. The D pawn, you almost never see the B pawn take. You know, it gets even more rare, and then you'll just have castles. And then you might have an f6 or bishop to g4. When I was playing e4 myself, bishop to g4 was a very challenging move to meet. I really believe that the Alapin gambit is, let me see, it is really good. Really good for black. It's really tough to meet as white. But anyways, going back to what we had in the game, we did see bishop coming back to a4. So this just keeps a lot more options on the board. But it does kind of get into like a Berlin type of a situation, as we see right here. We do have knight to f6. We got castles. Bishop to e7. We see rook over to e1. And like I said for you guys before, you know, those of you that are familiar with the Berlin, you know, this looks very similar. I mean, that pawn wasn't hanging. It was going to get one back. So we do have, let me move this mess up. So we do have b5. Just backing the bishop up, so we got bishop to b3. Pretty much only move unless you just want to play, you know, kamikaze sacrificial chess and do this and lose. But we do see bishop to b3. We got d6. We got c3 creating lift for our bishop. Castles by black. We got h3, rook to e8. So, you know, these types of positions are like pretty much just a lot of maneuvering going on. You know, once knight b comes to d2, you're going to need to like reroute it to like f1 coming up to like e3 or g3 because it's like literally blocking the bishop for life. So we do have d4. We got bishop to b7, knight b to d2. We got bishop back to f8. We got a4, h6, bishop down to c2, knight back to b8. So it might look kind of weird, like why am I backing the knight back up to b8? You're just rerouting it to d7 so you can get a c5 pawn push in. So bishop comes to d3. Normally a c5 pawn push. We don't see it in this game, but the knight b does come to d7. And then we do see the novelty of the game. Crazy because it just seems like such a natural move in the position. Pawn takes b5. I mean, it's just kind of like there's just really a lot of tension right there. Like something's going to have to give at some point. And it's just super logical. Like I said, for pawn to take on b5. We do see pawn taking a d4, pawn taking d4, and this is one of the whole reasons for playing c3, so that you can capture back, and now you have this nice little pawn center going on. It's kind of similar to when you play like some Sicilians, when you'll play a c3, or just pretty much anything where you'll have like a c3, you know, d4, e4 situation going on, and c5 will come, stuff like that. So we do see pawn taking b5, rook taking a8, and then we do have queen taking a8. And white has a nice advantage here. It's not like they're just completely winning, but they are up. You know, it's an estimate about like 0.8 of a pawn. So, I mean, it's almost a full pawn's worth. You know, it's mostly because, you know, white is soon going to be winning a pawn. So they are going to be up a pawn, but they do have, like I said, this really nice center. So they do command a little bit more space than black does. And also their minor pieces are just a little bit better. You know, once this knight kind of moves out of the way, this bishop can start to come into the game. And this bishop is just a little kind of sad. You know, this queen and this bishop, they're not, I mean, they're kind of biting on this pawn, but it's very heavily protected at the moment. So we have reached the point in the game that if you don't want to pause the video and see what white has the ability to play here to really just push this advantage, go ahead and do so. Touch. All right, cool. So like I said before, some of you guys might be tempted to grab this pawn right here, and this is actually what was seen in the game. But the unfortunate thing is this actually gives the pawn back, and this basically makes the position have like equality. So it's pretty much dead even here. So what the computer really wanted white to do first, and this was a really huge chance for Wesley So, is to actually push the e5 pawn forward. You know, your knight is very well protected, and you're just resolving the tension in the center before you capture this pawn, so you can be up a true pawn. Now you have two options. You can go knight to d5, or you can capture back here. You know, it's going to end up pretty much in the same situation. I mean, once you capture, you're going to go knight to d5. So, you know, if we just see knight to d5, bishop taking b5, then as you can see, you know, this knight is a little suspect because it is undefended, and this rook is right behind it. So you don't have a lot of movability for black. So this position is far superior from the position that we see in the actual game. And if you did guess e5 pawn push, then you would be a super gangster. So congratulations. But like I said, we did see bishop taking b5 in the game. But this does allow black to get their pawn back. So bishop takes on e4, knight takes e4, rook takes e4, bishop comes up to e3. And as you guys can see, I mean, the position is very equal. You know, these knights are protecting each other. And you can see that black has kind of unraveled themselves just a little bit. So they're doing a little bit better than, you know, the position that we saw if you were to push e5. So we do see knight down to b6. We see queen to c2. Rook comes up to e7. We see bishop to c6. Queen down to a2, trying to infiltrate into white's position. We do see rook to c1. The knight f comes to d5. Bishop comes down to d2. We see rook to e6. We see b3, encouraging a trade of queens, which, I mean, it's a legitimate thing you can do. I mean, you can trade. It's not like, you know, you're going to like be giving anything away in this position, but you know, Predke just decides that he doesn't want to do that. So we got queen up to a6. We see b4. Queen comes to a3. We see rook to b1. We see bishop to e7. Rook comes up to b3. We got a little checkarooski on a1. Queen to a1 with check. Rook comes down to b1. Queen to a3. So it looks like we might, you know, repeat in this position. But we do see bishop to b5. Bishop comes to f6. We see king up to h2. Just, you know, getting our king super duper safe. No more checks on the back rank. We see rook up to e7. So like I said, I mean, you guys can see that, you know, black has like managed to kind of get their pieces on a little bit more active squares and stuff like that. White hasn't made, you know, a gigantic amount of progress, even though they are, you know, ahead just a touch. We do see h4. We see queen up to a8. Bishop to c6. Queen over to c8. We see queen to d3. Queen comes to g4. We see g3. We got g5. Pawn takes g5. Pawn takes g5. We do see rook to a1. And then we see a pretty nice move by black. Queen to e4. This is forcing the trade of queens. You can't move this queen really too much anywhere because it is protecting this this knight. So you really have to trade in this position. So the queen takes e4, rook takes e4. We see rook up to a5, double attacking the under defended knight. We see a counter attack of g4. Bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, rook takes d5, pawn takes f3. We see bishop up to e3, trying to close, you know, everything as much as possible and, you know, make this rook be as inactive as possible. So we do see king over to f8. We see b5, king to e7, b6, pawn takes b6. We see rook to b5. We see bishop taking d4, and then pretty much only move rook to b4, pinning that bishop down. So the rook decides to give itself up for the bishop, which, I mean, seems like it's something, but, I mean, it pretty much makes everything still equal. So the pawn does take e3. We see bishop to c5. Rook to e4 with check. We see king over to d7. We see rook to f4, threatening the pawn. The king comes down to e6. We see g4. We see king to e5. And it is actually in this position that the players do agree to a draw. And some of you guys might be wondering, wait a minute, okay, I got a rook. Okay, I'm down 2 pawns, but I got a rook, right? I mean, it does kind of seem that way. You are ahead quite a bit as white, but the problem is, unless, I mean, Magnus Carlsen is going to come from nowhere and be like, nah, you can win this. I mean, there really isn't any way to force a win in this position. And I'll show you, like, you know, probably the best variation that you can go down. I mean, there's pretty much, you know, rook takes f3, king to g3 are the 2 main moves that you'll play. They're transposable because, like, one move is going to come right after the other. But like I said, this position is when they did agree to a draw. But if we play further, you know, you got king to g3, you got f6, you see rook up to f5 with check, king comes to e6. King takes f3, and like I said, I mean, you're pretty much going to get to this position no matter how you kind of move the pieces. But the main issue, and I'll show you why this is a big difference in a minute, but the main issue is the fact that you have this pawn all the way, like, far out there. So for those of you that are understanding of endgames, you understand that there is a huge, gigantic amount of, you know, value in an outside pass pawn. When you get into an endgame with kings and maybe like a minor or major piece or something like that, you understand that it is really, really hard for a king to hold pawns that are like spread out throughout the board. So if you have like pawns on one side or the other, it becomes a lot easier, you know, to kind of like, you know, hold the pawns in place. So what black is wanting to do is basically make sure that they cause as much havoc and keep this pawn, even at the expense of this pawn, or not this pawn. You want to keep this pawn, but actually you probably could. I mean, with the king, you can just kind of be over here in this area. Maybe not. Move the work down. Okay, I think that might be winning if you give away this pawn. But making sure you keep this pawn. So if we go ahead and hold to that, basically what you'll see, we'll just kind of run through some moves. You got b5, king coming to e2. We got b4, king coming to d3. We see d5, e4, pawn taking e4, king taking e4. We see bishop up to d6, and as you can see, the black pawn is not being moved any further. The bishop is holding it down. And then so we see rook over to b5, king comes up to d7, king goes down to d3. We see king to e7. And I mean, I'm just like literally running through like a possible variation just to kind of, you know, show you kind of like what, you know, how black can hold this position. King coming over to d7, king coming up to d5, rook coming up to c7. And the problem is in these positions and stuff, you cannot sacrifice the rook for the bishop because the pawn is going to be running. And so, yeah, and you can just pretty much just move the bishop away. So you're not just going to like leave the bishop there for it to get taken. So the king comes over to c7, king down to c4. You know, you might be thinking, okay, well, can I just like take here? The bishop takes and the king takes. Well, the problem with this is the king is going to be so far out of the action that black is going to be able to come around and grab this pawn. So if you had a situation like this, let's say, for example, like the king is going to go, you know, back over to d7. If you did go ahead and take here, this is completely winning for black because, as you can see, this king is so far out of the mix, and this king is, you know, coming in for the kill. So the king would be sidestepping over here. The king would be able to diagonally, you know, gain the opposition and gain this pawn, and it's just a matter of queening this pawn. So what we would see would be probably rook to d5, king to c6, rook down to d1. And like I said, just basically just holding everything. Making sure the pawn doesn't move from where it is, moving the rook down. I mean, you know, just basically just shifting back and forth. Even though you are up material, you know, you have a superior piece against the bishop. You're not really able to do anything. Now, backing up, let's just change it. Like I said before, let's change it and say that after king came to d3, let's just say, this is going to look really weird, but let's just say black gives away this outside pawn. Let's just say that, you know, we just don't care about the pawn. So we would push something like b3. The king would come to c3. We got b2. The king takes b2. Of course, you're going to take on e3 with the bishop. But let's say that the bishop doesn't. You back it up to b6, right? You have rook down to f3. This, like, completely drastically changes the situation. Because the king is not stuck, like, on this, like, you know, area of the board anymore. So the king is going to be able to, like, march itself up and get into the mix. And you do have a situation where you are a lot more favorable if you do want to give up the rook for the bishop. And then the king can kind of be over here somewhere. That's a major, major difference. Still takes some technique, but it is winnable as white. So that is that game. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Spasibo for all of my people that are coming from Russia or who do speak Russian. Meraming salamat aking makaibigan. Let me see what I want to say. Mabuting pagbati ingat lagi to you. Appreciate you guys very much, and I'll see y'all next time.